Hey, Extension friends, Nate Burt here, NTAE Key Informant. Wanted to spend just a few minutes today talking about this idea of asking when in doubt. So I will share a personal story by way of teeing up this discussion today. And how many of you have a spouse or a partner or a friend that maybe you work with from time to time outside of Extension, outside of climate work, but just in a life capacity, right? Maybe you volunteer together or you have a shared community garden or whatever. Well, I was in the garden this morning working with my wife, and my wife said, yeah, pick a bed and in the garden and you can weed whatever you want. So, me feeling like the expert farmer gardener, I just sort of dug in and I worked in a few places where my wife had said, hey, there are some weeds here, like focus here. So got the okra weeded, asked some astute questions around like, is this a weed or a plant? And my wife said, oh, that's a garbanzo bean, don't touch it, but you can weed everything else. Well, then I found a bed that I hadn't received any instructions on, and I decided that I would just start pulling stuff up because it looks like weeds that we see around our small farm. And it turns out my wife had planted marigolds next to the tomato plants, but I didn't know that, and so I just was ripping things out right and left. It was coming out of the ground, great, really easy weeding. And then, man, when I found out I was making the wrong decision, my wife was very understanding and said, look, they're kind of crowding out the tomatoes, so I was thinking about doing that anyway. But still, these are beneficial plants. We're trying to use, fewer, appropriate chemistry where necessary, but try to limit that as much as possible to really let nature take its course, bring in beneficial insects, etc. And I felt really bad. I hadn't asked. And so did I have doubt? Probably not enough, right? But I did at least have the self-awareness to recognize, look, I should have asked before I started just ripping plants out of the ground. So in a similar way, when it comes to climate programming and climate work, it always makes sense to ask, right? Especially anytime other extension professionals or outside partners are involved. Never assume, always ask. So just a few pointers that might be helpful. Again, this is not rocket science, but maybe it can be useful to you or perhaps reinforce best practices you already use. The first thing I've always observed, I guess maybe I've learned through the school of hard knocks, is like confidence is overrated. So certainly there may be a handful of things you are truly an expert in. So always, own that and don't be ashamed of like what you know. At the same time, recognize that there may be aspects of your expertise that are blind spots or things that you haven't really thought through. Or, maybe in this current context, whether it's the funding landscape or the programmatic landscape or how the science of climate is evolving, maybe you really don't know for sure. And so it never hurts to get a second opinion, to bring outsiders into your circle to really help you make decisions. And so I think whenever it comes to making sort of coming to a fork in the road from a programming standpoint or a proposal development standpoint or whatever you might be working on in climate, here are a few questions I think can be helpful. Number one, what one decision is needed next? Like, what do I need to figure out? Secondly, who has the authority, right? Do you have full ownership in the decision? Is it going to be an extension administrator or another land grant or another partner in the community or a combination of those people who have the ultimate sign-off, so to speak? Figure that out. Then figure out who deserves to influence that, right? You're going to need the authority people in the room to make the decision, but you're also going to need some influencers, right? Maybe they don't have the checkbook or the ultimate decision-making authority, but their input really matters. Their expertise, their perspective, their previous, insights working on projects like this one. And then determine what's the path forward, right? How are we going to combine these things to make sure the authority figures, the influencers, and myself, wherever you fit into that equation, how do we get them in the same either physical or virtual room? How do we make sure we get the right input? And what's the path forward? And how do we then, finally, this last bullet point, how do we communicate that back to everyone so they know, hey, here's what was decided. Here's how we're going to move forward. So everyone has sort of this full circle loop of communications and they're brought in. And now you've sort of moved beyond the doubt into the doing, right? Move beyond the doubt into the doing because you followed these key steps. So bottom line, when in doubt, ask, and don't be afraid, don't be ashamed. This is part of being a leader. This is part of making good, insightful, informed decisions to advance climate work and make sure you're not having to redo things later on to the degree that's within your control. So the call to action today is to email me at nateburt@extension.org and let me know what's one decision you need to make, but maybe you're facing uncertainty around, right? So there's some doubt, there's some hesitation. That could be for any number of reasons, but whatever it is, think about what is that decision and what's the right next step to take based on this framework that I've laid out for you. What do you think is the next right step? So email me, let me know. I hope this was helpful to you. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.